Hi, I'm John McNeil, and this is the Invest Strong Network. Welcome. The drum beats of war are resounding in Central and Eastern Europe again, and the Biden administration and the Western allies are working on a package of economic sanctions to be levied against Russia to see if that would either deter or even slow down their operations in the Ukraine. Now, this entire situation really begs the question: does economic or do economic sanctions work as an effective means of foreign policy? So for that question, what I wanted to do is to take some historical examples and examine them closely and see what nuggets of wisdom we can glean from previous global actions. All right. So countries, especially the U.S., and really I'll present this particular subject from an American standpoint. The U.S. imposes economic sanctions on various regimes for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's just to slow down their economic or technological development, but much more often it's designed to be a punishment for some kind of aggression. So that's either supporting some proxy organization or an outright, military action of their own genesis or something like that. And it's meant to degrade their economy to the point where the persons that are in power in the regime will come to their senses and decide to make a diplomatic effort to resolve their disputes instead of resorting to military action, right? Now, the sanctions can either be targeted, which really in the historical examples that I'm looking at, most of these targets, I'm sorry, most of the sanctions that the U.S. levied against places like Libya and places like Iran and North Korea were basically targeted sanctions designed to let the people in power know that we're watching them, that we disapprove of what they do, and that they'll never really have the full bounty of economic prosperity so long as they continue their particular policies. Now, there have been occasions where the U.S. has, along with its allies, right, have imposed sweeping sanctions, sanctions that are basically designed to really degrade the economy of a regime and actually, hopefully, bring it down. And this has been the case in North Korea. It was certainly the case in Iraq and actually also in the Soviet Union, where economic sanctions were also paired with military, political, and diplomatic efforts to put pressure on the prevailing regime. Now, in each one of these instances, the level of success is questionable, right? So, for example, in Cuba, the U.S. has had this sweeping blockade on Cuba since the early 1960s. And these economic sanctions have really put a stranglehold on the Cuban economy. It's been really devastating for the Cuban people, but the U.S. really had not been able to get the European or the other Latin American or even Canada on their sides to implement these sanctions. The Castro regime, which is fading but still present, has been able to incredibly endure these tremendous sanctions for some 60 years now. and continues to hold power in Cuba, although they've been tremendously diminished since the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. So, have the sanctions worked on Cuba? Well, yes, it certainly degraded their economy. And no, it has not brought about the downfall of the Castro order, at least not yet. All right. Now, we look at Iraq. Now, after Saddam's invasion of Kuwait in 1990, Papa Bush's administration, along with the allies, put very, very severe sanctions on Iraq to try to convince the Saddam regime to evacuate from Kuwait. Now, one of the clear baseline functions of any authoritarian dictatorial regime is that economic sanctions themselves will never deter their aggressive actions. It just won't do it. And in fact, it did not here either. And so, although Iraq was basically cut off from the global oil markets, cut off from the global financial markets, their economy really took a wallop. Saddam and his forces stayed in Kuwait until they were forcibly ejected by the American-led coalition in 1991. And in fact, the very harsh sanctions regime stood on the Saddam regime, but could not bring it down. In fact, the Saddam regime was remarkably resilient through everything that it had suffered in the 1990s and the early 2000s. And of course, it was only the coalition led by Bush the Younger that ended up removing Saddam and his regime entirely. However, something very interesting could be noticed there. When the military action that removed the Saddam regime in 2003 went in, they found a country and an economy that had been basically laid bare by the sanctions, right? So the vibrancy and the strength of the Saddam regime had been basically whittled away. The whole thing was a shell by the time of the 2003 invasion. And that was to a very large degree a result of the sanctions, right? Now, I look at Argentina. So in 1982, Argentina invades the Falkland Islands. Global powers, including the US, announced economic sanctions on Argentina. Did that get them to evacuate their forces from the Falkland Islands? No, but it definitely wore down their economy, which was already pretty weak to begin with, which is why their former leader, this Gualtieri guy, ordered the invasion in the first place to kind of take the attention off of the failing economy. But the sanctions weakened the Argentine regime, and of course, it was the British military action which removed their forces from the Falkland Islands in its entirety. And of course, the Gualtieri regime ended up falling not long after that, right? Now, I come to Libya. So the US had placed sanctions of a variety of sorts on Libya throughout the 1980s, 90s, and early 2000s. This was because the Gaddafi regime had supported terrorist organizations around the world. They were trying to punish him. They definitely did that. It drained the Libyan economy. And by the time that there was finally a popular uprising against Mr. Gaddafi in 2011, his regime toppled rather quickly, right? And certainly one would think that if the sanctions had not had such a tremendous effect on the Libyan economy, he would not have gone down so quickly or easily, right? All right. Now let's look at Iran. So the United States has basically had sanctions on Iran since the Shia Revolution of 1979. And these sanctions had gotten progressively strengthened because we've gotten foreign allies on board. Now, when the Iranians began to develop their nuclear weapons, their nuclear program for energy, they say, but for possible weapons reasons, as Israel and the U.S. believe, the the Bush Jr. administration and the Obama administration worked hard to place very biting sanctions on Iran in order to get them to the bargaining table to surrender their nuclear program. Well, in fact, they were able to succeed and get an agreement to do that. And the sanctions went a long way towards convincing them to do that, right? Now, the Trump administration backed out of that deal and imposed even harsher sanctions on Iran. But by them backing out of the deal, it gave the Iranians basically carte blanche to restart their nuclear program, which it has and will continue to put pressure on the global powers to bring an end to their nuclear program in the future. But this will be a nuclear program that has gained quite a bit of progress in the last 5 years because of what the Trump administration has done. However, the sanctions against Iran, the toughened sanctions, has put tremendous pressure on the Iranian economy, and there's some question as to whether or not the regime can hold up. Okay, last example, the Soviet Union itself. So there had been sanctions from the American standpoint on the Soviet Union, basically from the Stalinist days of the 1950s. However, after their invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 rather, the sanctions were tremendously enhanced, and also they were augmented by the U.S. and its allies in Egypt and Pakistan and elsewhere, basically supporting the opposition to the Russian-led invasion through covert means, some covert, some overt, but was basically putting pressure on the Soviet occupation forces. Now, this pressure on the Soviet Union actually was augmented by a collapse in oil prices. And the Soviet Union, as Russia is today, is a petrol power, and so that pressure that was caused by a drop in oil prices, in addition to very expensive military operations and the diplomatic isolation and the sanctions, all eventually added up and caused the collapse of the mighty Soviet Union in the early 1990s. All right, bottom line, do economic sanctions work as a policy of foreign diplomacy? Well, the answer is both yes and no. If the intent is to use sanctions to defeat an aggressive enemy, the answer is no, right? Sanctions, economic sanctions alone will never do that, never deter an authoritarian, dictatorial aggressor. If, however, the goal is to degrade an economy, to put political and diplomatic pressure and financial pressure on a regime that's doing bad business, combined with being augmented by diplomatic pressure and military pressure, because remember, any kind of military operation is extraordinarily expensive to embark upon and maintain, right? In combination, sanctions can absolutely have a very palpable effect on the operations of an aggressor nation, right? And no doubt the Biden people at the Defense Department and the State Department and the NATO allies and other allies around the world, they're looking at that, and they should, right? And think of the entire panoply of options to either deter or reverse Russian aggression. All right, so those are my thoughts for this week. Hope you found them insightful. If so, please hit that thumbs up button. I would appreciate it. Also, let me know what you think. Leave a comment. I'll respond to each and every one. I promise you. And of course, subscribe. Please subscribe to Invest Strong. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much, friends, and good blessings.